going to look at the first two steps to the character of God. Would you like to have the character of God? I wasn't very enthusiastic. Would you like to have the character of God? Yeah, there's really nothing wrong with His character, is there? I think I told you one night, I forget now which one it was, but the human race has two things in common across the board. All people, everywhere, doesn't matter where they are, we all have two things in common. Number one, we all want to be happy, right? Have you ever met anybody who, seriously, I mean, they might have been joking or something, but in sincerity, have you ever met anybody who just said, "Oh, I wish I could be miserable"? No, you've never heard anybody say that. We all want to be happy. It's across the board, everybody. And we all want to be right. We all want to be right. I've never met anybody who said, "Oh, I just wish I could be wrong." No, it's not hard to be wrong. You can be wrong, easy. Being right is what's hard. And we all want to be right. The good news is that being right and being happy go together. They're a package deal. When you're right, you're happy. When you're wrong, you're miserable. Right? Yeah. So, if you have the character of God, there's nothing wrong with His character. If you have that character, you are right, which means you are happy. And we're going to look at the first two steps. The Bible actually gives us 8 steps to the character of God. We're going to look at 2 of them tonight. Matthew 5:3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed means happy. That's what the word means. Happy are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. This is actually the first step into the Christian family. The first step into the kingdom of heaven. And when we take this step, he says we already have the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. This is not a ladder that we climb, and when we get to the 8th step, we're in heaven. No, he says on the first step, you have the kingdom of heaven. Isn't that good news? One step, and you have the kingdom of heaven. Isn't that what you want? Kingdom of heaven, yes. He's saying, with this first step, you get the kingdom of heaven. So what does it mean? Well, there are a lot of directions I could go from that verse. I could preach a lot of different directions. But the Bible really doesn't give me that option. Because 5 chapters from the end of Matthew, see, this is 5 chapters into Matthew, chapter 5. Chapter 23 is 5 chapters from the end of Matthew. And in chapter 23, we have the mirror image, which focuses our understanding. And in chapter 23, we have 8 steps to the character of Satan. Matthew 23:12. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. But woe to you. Woe means unhappy. So we had blessed, that's happy. Now we have woe, which is unhappy. This is the mirror image. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men, for you neither go in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. What does that mean? You don't go in, and you won't let others go in. What was it about the Pharisees that stopped them from going in, and the people that they evangelized, the people that they brought into the family? What was it about them? We're going to look at that before we're done. But on the happy side of it, Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." That sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? Happy are the poor in spirit. And then when we looked at the mirror image, it talked about being humble. So poor in spirit obviously means being humble. Pride is the first step to the character of Satan. Humility is the first step to the character of God. God often uses the physical world to explain the spiritual. So let's try that. This is taken from Funk and Wagnalls, and it's about a physical molecule. We're going to apply it to a righteous molecule. So here's the definition. A molecule is the smallest particle of a substance, having the specific chemical properties of that substance. In principle, a sample of water can be divided into two parts, and each part further divided, producing smaller samples of water. The process of division and subdivision ultimately produces a single molecule of water whose further splitting gives something that is not water-like in character, hydrogen and oxygen. So in other words, you can only split that drop of water down so far, and then you get down to one molecule, and if you split that molecule, it's not water anymore. It turned into hydrogen and oxygen. So let's apply that principle. Each molecule is pictured as existing independently of other molecules. An encounter of two usually results in their bouncing away from each other without fundamental change. More violent encounters alter the molecular composition, as when a chemical change occurs. So let's apply this reasoning. This is God's creation, physical creation, and let's look at it from a spiritual standpoint. Here would be a righteous molecule. It has three parts. Just like water has hydrogen and oxygen, this molecule has love, faith, and humility. And whichever is the focus, it could be love, it could be faith, it could be humility, but whichever is the focus of the molecule, the other two are always supporting it. In other words, you cannot have love without faith and humility. Can you think why that would be true? Definition of love is putting others first. What's the definition of humility? Putting others first. So those two are inseparable, right? But logic will tell you that if you don't take care of yourself, you won't be there to take care of anybody else, right? So you have to put self first. That's what logic says. You have to put self first so that you can be there to help other people. That's just logical. But faith and love are not logical. You can only put other people first if we're talking about really, you can pretend, but if we're talking about really putting them first, you can only do that if you know that God has your back. If God is putting you first, then you are free to put others first. Does God have my back? Didn't Calvary show me that? He put me first. At Calvary, Jesus put me first. He took my sin and He gave me His righteousness. He has my back. And that frees me to put other people first. Do you see why faith has to be in this molecule? You cannot have, this is a small, the point I'm trying to make is that this is as small as righteousness can get. The first step into the kingdom of heaven is a step that we've already identified as humility, but humility always is accompanied by love and faith. So really the first step involves all three because they're inseparable. This is as small as a righteous molecule can get. So if humility is the focus, then faith and love are supporting that humility. And if faith is the focus, humility and love are supporting that faith. They are inseparable component parts of the same thing. Can we all see that? Because I can back up and go through it again. We just won't get out by 9 o'clock, that's all. Okay. If one component part of the righteous molecule changes, watch what happens. So we have a righteous molecule. Love is the focus is supported by faith and humility. But If the faith turns into doubt, it's no longer righteous, it's just a molecule. And when you doubt that God has your back, look what happens to humility. Now you have to take care of yourself. See, you doubt that God has your back. He's not looking out for you, so now you have to look out for yourself, and that means you're putting self first, which is pride. And if you have pride, your love has turned to lust. See, the definition of love is selflessness. The definition of lust is selfishness. Sometimes I have young people come to me and say, I have a boyfriend or I have a girlfriend, and I don't know if it's real love or if it's just chemistry, lust. Well, that's easy because they are totally the opposite. If you're in a relationship for what you bring to the relationship, what you can do for the other person, that's love. But if you're in a relationship for what you get from the other person, that's lust. They are totally opposite, not similar at all. And the sin molecule looks just like this. And it doesn't matter which one is the focus, it's always supported by the other two. These three are just as inseparable as the three in the righteous molecule are inseparable. Pride always includes doubt and lust, which is selfishness. Humility always includes faith and love, which is selflessness. The problem with humility is that it isn't cool. Right? I mean, we like to present this persona to the world that we're cool. And life doesn't cause us any sweat. As a matter of fact, when I was growing up, that was a thing. You could say, "How you doing, man?" And chances are he'd say, "No sweat." No sweat. Now, most of you are not old enough to remember no sweat. Now it's chill. Chill, dude. Cool. We all want to be cool. No sweat. The problem with that is, well, here's the phrases. Chill out, be cool, no sweat, I'm cool. That's what we like to present to the world. The problem with that is the Bible says, and we read it earlier, in the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. God has decreed that we sweat. So when we pretend to be cool, we're actually rebelling against God. That's the opposite of humility. Humility is acknowledging, yes, life causes sweat. Life is hard. Life is sometimes troubling, difficult. We're not always on top of it. And we need to be humble enough to confess that. Sometimes we need help. To be honest with you, there's hardly a day goes by I don't need God's help to keep me a Christian. The devil is always attacking, trying to get me off track, trying to send me down the wrong road, trying to disturb my relationship with my Heavenly Father. I need help. I can't do it without Him. See, I'm not cool. I sweat. For out of it you were taken. You shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return. Psychiatrists would probably say that coming from dirt and going to dirt doesn't allow for a good self-image. Right? I mean, that's what a psychiatrist would tell you. So, what is going to happen to your self-image if it's based on personal appearance? If I showed you a picture of me when I was 25 years old, you would not believe we're the same person. As a matter of fact, I've got a portrait hanging on my wall. Rudy there in the back was at my house not long ago, and there's a picture hanging on the wall taken when my wife and I were married, and he said, quote, if I don't say it right, you can correct me, but he said to my wife, "Was that your first husband?" If your self-image is based on personal appearance, What is going to happen to that when you're 70 or 80? It's going to go away. You know, even Elizabeth Taylor doesn't look like she did when she did that movie about National Velvet. Anybody ever see that, National Velvet? That was her breakout role, I think, her first big role, Elizabeth Taylor. She doesn't look like that anymore. What about if your self-image is based on your level of education? You know, I'm 70 years old. I have forgotten probably 90% of everything I've ever learned. I mean, I don't remember all that stuff. I've read so many books. I'd have to read them all again. I don't even remember what's in most of them. And as I get older, it gets harder to remember. I'm not sure if it's old timers or Alzheimer's, but you know, something is happening to my brain. If my self-image is based upon my level of education, I'm losing that. And my self-image will go by the wayside too. What about my athletic ability? Well, it's a joke. You know, it is a joke. I do get up and walk 5 miles every morning. Let's see, today I have 5.6 miles. I walk 5, but when I got out of the Army, I was able to run 20 miles with a 40-pound pack on my back. If I tried to run 20 steps with a 40-pound pack on my back, I would expire with a heart attack, I'm sure. If my self-image is based on that, what's going to happen to my self-image? It's going to fall apart. What about my intelligence? Well, there's always somebody smarter, but as you get older, you lose that too. And wealth, if it's based upon wealth, that's, you know, back in the 20s when the market crashed and people were committing suicide because their self-image was all tied up in their bank account. There's really only one healthy self-image you can have. And it's based on the fact that the most powerful being in the universe is in love with you. He would rather die than spend eternity without you. And he did. He died so that he could spend eternity with each and every one of us. There's no self-image better than that self-image. And this one doesn't go away. Just because I get old and overweight and ugly and my mind doesn't work right anymore, God still loves me. That hasn't changed. That's the self-image that leads to wonder instead of pride. All of those other self-images lead us to think in terms of how do we stack up against other people? You know, am I smarter than they are? Am I prettier than they are? Do I have more money than they do? And it all leads to personal pride. Do I have more education than they do? It's all about pride and ego. But the self-image that comes from being a child of our Heavenly Father leads to wonder and awe and appreciation, but never to pride. Step 2, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are those who mourn. The mirror image. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayers. Therefore you will receive greater condemnation. So apparently we're going to be in one of these two camps. We're either going to be among those who mourn, or we're going to be among those who give people a reason to mourn, who cause people to mourn. Now, to really understand this, we have to understand some things that go along with it. What Jesus is showing us is that as human beings, we have 8 rough edges. And he's showing us how to smooth them out. the 8 steps to the character of God, are ways that we smooth those out. You see, the trip through life is going to be much easier when the wheel looks like this. Right? When it looks like that, that's a bumpy road. That's a bumpy ride through life. And Jesus is trying to show us how to turn it into something that will produce a much nicer ride. That doesn't mean there's not going to be trouble. Doesn't mean that. It just means that inside, in our hearts, we will always know that we can trust Jesus. And so we don't have to stress. We don't have to get pulled all out of shape. We can just trust that He has our back. And it's all going to go good, the way He wants it to go. If we are to be friends forever, we don't need the rough edges. Now, some of you have been married for a long time and some not so long. When you first got married, weren't there some rough edges that have kind of smoothed out over the years? And you don't have the same fights that you used to have, the same arguments, the same discussions, the same disputes, or maybe you do. Has it not got better? Everybody's quiet. Well, let's move along. I think you get it. We need to be able to have a relationship with each other where friction is reduced. You know, we can be friends and not always competing, but we can be friends. So why would just Jesus say, happy are those who are unhappy? I mean, mourning is unhappy, right? If you're mourning, you're not happy. And when He says, blessed are those who mourn, He's basically saying, and it could just as easily have been translated, happy are those who are unhappy. It means the same thing. Why would He say that? Happy are those who are unhappy. Well, first of all, the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is selfishness. Love is selflessness. Its opposite is selfishness. The opposite of hate is not love. The opposite of hate is mourn. Because when somebody has given you a reason to hate them, they have also given you a reason to mourn, haven't they? Huh? If they've given you a reason to hate them, they have also given you a reason to mourn. And the human mind, the human brain can only focus on one thing at a time. Now, I know you can chew gum and walk, but you can only focus on one thing at a time, which is why the Little League coach tells his Little League team, when they're up to bat, keep your eye on the ball. Because you cannot focus on Grandma and Grandpa in the stands and expect to hit a home run. You have to focus on the ball because the human brain can only focus on one thing at a time. Now, you may be thinking that I'm all wet. And that's okay. I've had people think that about me before. If somebody burns your house down, you can mourn the loss of your house and hate the person who burned it down, and you can do both at the same time. Am I right? That's right. But that's not the kind of mourning Jesus is talking about. If that was all He was talking about, He didn't have very much to say, because we all do that. If somebody burns my house down, yes, I will mourn the loss of my house, and yes, I will be unhappy with the person who burned it down, and I can do all of that at the same time. But that is not what Jesus is talking about. What Jesus is talking about, I already gave it away, I'm about ready to give you the quiz, is what He demonstrated when He was at Calvary. He was mourning the loss of the people who were killing Him. And you see, you cannot mourn the loss to the kingdom of heaven of the person who burns your house down and hate him at the same time. You cannot mourn his loss to the kingdom of heaven and hate him at the same time. And that's what Jesus showed us at Calvary. He was mourning the loss of those soldiers, so much so that he prayed that God would not hold this sin accountable to them. Father, forgive them. They don't understand what they're doing. Please forgive them. Do you know we have the 7 last utterances of Christ, and not one of them is a scream? How could that happen? He had a spike driven through each hand and his feet. Now, some of you will tell me it wasn't the hand, it was the wrist. Okay. Try driving a spike either place and don't scream. Huh? How come? I mean, Jesus had no advantage over us. He never used his divinity. If he had used his divinity, he could not have been my example. He could not have died my death for me if he had used his own divinity. He had no advantage. When they drove those nails through his flesh, why didn't he scream? My wife and I have had 3 children by Lamaze, which means I was in the delivery room. And when they give you Lamaze instruction, what they teach you is to focus your mind on something outside your pain, because the human mind can only focus on one thing at a time. And so my wife would focus on the corner of the room or a spot on the ceiling or anything except her pain. And when we had our 3 children, I'm telling you the truth, she's not in here to back me up, but I promise you, my wife never screamed. There were women screaming all over the place, you know. Babies were being born in other rooms and women were screaming. My wife never screamed because her mind was focused outside of her pain. What was Jesus focused on? He was focused upon the salvation of the very people who were killing him. And if we really love lost humanity, if we are focused upon getting them into heaven, you cannot mourn and hate at the same time. It's been said that hatred is a cup of poison that we drink, hoping it will kill our enemy. Sad but true. People carry hatred around with them, thinking it will hurt the people that they hate. It only hurts us. It doesn't hurt the people that we hate. It only hurts us. So the people who mourn are the only ones who can be happy. Do you see it? The people who mourn are the only ones who can be happy. The others are carrying their hatred around with them, drinking their own poison, killing their own spirituality, giving themselves over to the control of the devil, instead of resting in the love, in the provision, in the eternal life that God is offering every one of us. Blessed are those who mourn. They shall be comforted. But those who hate can't find comfort, ever. They have identified with the kingdom of darkness. They'll wind up in the lake of fire. There will be no comfort for those who hate. And so step 2, blessed are those who mourn. Somebody cuts you off in traffic, you don't have to hate him. Mourn the fact that he hasn't learned how to be a better driver than that. Mourn the fact that he needs to be closer to heaven or he wouldn't do that. Mourn his loss to the kingdom. I promise you this. Think about your worst enemy. We all have one. I mean, the devil is not going to let us off without somebody who's always on our case. There is somebody in your life that just seems to go out of their way to persecute you. So think about your worst enemy. If he doesn't learn this lesson, he's going to wind up in the lake of fire. Can't you feel sorry for him? Can't you mourn his loss to the family of heaven? Because Jesus pronounces a blessing upon those who mourn instead of hate.